This time I want to show you my workbench and how I built it. I think that we can all agree that the most important and critical tool in any wood shop is a workbench. I didn't have one, so I decided to go for it and build it by my own. I used common pine, which may not be the ideal material for it, but since this was the first time I'm doing a workbench, I decided to go with pine. But the vices, as you will see, they are built out of oak in order to resist the wear and tear. On the end, it resulted in a great bench. At least I like it very much. Aesthetically and functionally, it works perfectly well. I already used it for a few things I needed to do, so I'm pretty happy with the results. If you want to see how I constructed it, please stay connected and look at the following video. Thank you. These are the two books that I studied and used as inspiration, and I think they are both great. The Workbench design book has a more artistic approach, and the Workbench is a more practical and mechanical approach, but both are really great sources of inspirations and tips. Okay, everything starts with the sourcing of the materials. I use 2x4s and 2x6. I planned the 2x4s in order to use them for the top. I glued them up together, trying to select the best surface to stay on the top. A lot of clamping, and I did it in sections in order to make sure that they fit into my planner. My bench should finish at a total width of 30 inches, 27 to 30 inches. So here I take the first section and pass it through the planner. This was pretty tough to do because each section is pretty heavy. I planted a lot on the top, but at the bottom I tried to do it just a little bit in order to keep material on the top. I don't care if it's marked at the bottom, but at least the top should be very smooth. I did several passes until the glue lines disappeared. Just checking here, putting all sections together. If they are square, I mark them, and then with the fest tool I joined the three sections. I put in the tenons, and the fest tool is, I'm always amazed how precise this tool is and how good it works. You see here how fast I can work. I'm just kidding. And now we can see the mortise that the tenon cuts, and I used the biggest tenons that fest tool produces, which are the 140 millimeters. And this is always the moment where we cannot be sure that it will all fit. This must be precise to the millimeter, and it was, so I'm happy. I just used the clamps to pull this together, and then I added pipe clamps and whatever clamps I could find in my shop in order to ensure a proper clamping. I like those Bessie parallel clamps. They are very strong and they exercise a very smooth force. Here the last sections, I did this section, I didn't want to glue up together the three sections at the same time in order to control the glue line. So I'm doing here the third section. Sorry, my clothes, but I was just making a break during office hours. Again, checking for flatness, everything seems to be working fine, so it's time to clamp the last section on it. I also added a few coils. Now after I took the clamps off, I just cut off the last portion of each of the sides of the bench. Now, since my circular saw could not go through the 3.5 inches, I needed to do the last part manually, which was not so bad. I did it on both sides, of course, in order to get a smooth finish. Same thing here, finish it up manually. Now I started to work on the rafters and on the legs. I wanted to use mortise and tenons as much as I could in order to ensure a solid base. So what I did, I used the 6x2s and put it together, and I just left the tenon outside. The tenon of 5 inches long in order to make sure that it fits into the legs. Clamping again. And here we go. So now I'm cutting the pieces of the legs. You can see I leave the mortise inside in order to make sure that it passes. Then again through the planer, I just moved the rafters through the planer. A lot of planning during this project, a lot of dust, and they are heavy as well. Now finishing up the legs, I add the other piece. I could have glued this all together at one single step, but since I wanted to make sure to have the legs planned and everything, I wanted to make sure that the mortise is exactly the width of the tenons. Now cutting this down to 5 inches in order to remove the glue lines. Since my table saw is only 3.5 inches tall, it cuts only 3.5 inches tall, I just did it twice from both sides. Planning again in order to make sure that we got a smooth surface. And here I'm cutting also the stretchers that go at each of the sides. There you can see the background already, the long stretchers, and these are the shorter ones. Making sure that the stretcher fit. And again, similar to what I did with the long ones, I'm gluing this here together and leaving the tenons outside. There we go. We just clamp this. Didn't want to use the nail gun, so because I wanted to plan this. And here now I'm going to cut in the cross mortise because I wanted to make a joinery and take the apron that the workbench would have in order to make the cross joint for the aprons. I think this is the only use I give to this tool, which is a great thing to do. It saves a lot of time. Now testing it, I cut a few scraps in order to test it. works perfectly well. Now we're going to cut the lap and notch this part out. This is to make a lap joint. This is a nice part, and you have a very sharp chisel. This goes pretty easy. Testing with my scrap pieces to make sure that it fits and everything is at the same height. Now I'm gonna prepare and notch out joints for the aprons. Same thing here. I chisel that piece out. Good. When I'm done, I do the first assemble each of those pieces. The assembly is pretty straightforward and it looks pretty good. I decided not to use any glue in the assembly of the base in order to be able to later to disassemble if I need to move this around. Now I took off the apron again and put it on the reverse side of the top in order to make the holes to fix the top to the base. Making the holes here, after measuring exactly where I would put it in, and I needed to go a little bit deeper and I used those inserts. 5/16. I used everything here, the bolts are all 5/16, just in order to standardize to one single type of bolts. I use those inserts in order to make sure that I can put it on and off as many times I like. Here I'm making now the holes inside of the legs in order to fix the tenons. Now a round over bit to make this look a little bit nicer. I love that wireless router, it gives so much flexibility. Also the long stretchers as well. And here let's see how they fit. Very snugly fit. I love that. Let's put in the other part, the other leg. And here we go. Perfect fit. So now let's make the final assembly. The stretchers here, the shorter stretchers. Let's put in the carriage bolts. And here I needed to go all the way through, even though I already had in the drill press I already made a hole, but I wanted to go through the tenons. And now you just, I don't want the bolts to protrude on the surface, so with a Forstner bit I made a little bit recess where the bolts could stay in. Here we go. Fix this, and it is on, of course, on the four legs. Same thing with the stretchers. Now the apron needs to go fixed against the legs. First I make the recess in order to hide the head of the bolt, and then let's go deep inside inside of the leg, and here I used black bolts. Good. I did this, of course, in the 4 legs, and now I'm gonna to flip this over and to see if I can fix it already. There we go. We do first fix, and now we work on the vise. Vise, this one I got it from Amazon. I bought the first one to see the quality and I liked it, then I bought the second one in order to have the tail vise and the main vise. Here I'm working on red oak in order to do the vices, and the jaws of the vices, both sides needed to be, of course, oak, otherwise the pine would take a hit. Trying to remove the glue line here, both sides. I love this, how this looks like when you do this, because especially in oak it gives you such a smooth surface. I pass it through the jointer to ensure it's completely flat, and now I use the router to make sure that the beginnings and the ends of the top are smooth. And here I need to cut out this part in order to install one of the jaws of the vise, which will be oak, of course. Since I measured a little bit too much, then I realized that I took about 1/8 of an inch too much. You will see that I glued in 1/4 of walnut, just in order to show a little bit of contrast and a difference. I turned it, and now I routed flush all the different borders that I had in order to make sure that everything is flush. I used a shoulder chisel here, which makes a great job in ensuring that we get the perfect 90 degrees angle, and make sure that here you see that's the walnut piece that I glued on it. And I think the best thing is manually, slowly making it flush. And now these are the other inserts I use. Again, 5/16. I put on 3, and here comes the jaw. It's bolted against it. I can also change it whenever it gets damaged or whatsoever, or take it to my new top if I do a new top. And this is just a template I created for the vise. I created an MDF, so I put it together here in order to make the holes, 35 millimeters and 25 millimeters, attaching here the hardware of the vise. I also attached the footings and those casters. Here is the end vise jaw, which is of course a little bit bigger. I cut it here, flush, and then I cut it in 45 degrees in order to make sure that I do not have that many strong edges. Here I'm marking 3. I am making the slots in order to make sure that the wood can move with expansion, the seasonal expansion and contraction of the wood. Since this is about 2 inches wide, almost 2 inches thick, I did not have a router bit that long, so I turned it around and just attacked it from the other side, which allowed me to make a complete slot through it. There we go. And now, in order to hide the bolt heads, I use this router bit to create a recess where the bolt head and the washer can fit. There we go. Perfectly well. Now, same thing as the other jaw in the main vise. I decided to use those inserts in order to be able to move this or disassemble it whenever I need to. And I put it on. Same thing as with the other one. I just bolted this in place in order to mark everything, and with the same template, since this was the same vise, this is the same vise, I measured this and made sure that all the holes are in the right place. You can see also that the apron had some holes. I realized that I needed to make those holes in order to make sure that the vise fits. Then I cut off a 44 angle as well here. And here I'm fixing the hardware. Now on the other jaw, I wanted to go completely through. So after going to the drill press, I did it manually. There we go. That's the other jaw, and there it closes completely. Now I fix this again. After turning it around, I also fixed those casters. This works perfectly well and it moves really smooth. Now I need to fix those jaws to the other jaw. I need to fix it to the vise hardware. I used inserts again. I tried to use copper screws, but they really get damaged very easily, so I put in those inserts and those Allen screws in stainless steel. Just because I didn't get any other ones, this was stainless steel, but in reality it was not necessary. Same here. You can see I'm already using the vise of the bench for this purpose, and it works perfectly well. I love it. So here we are attaching the hardware to the other jaw. Okay, now even though everything was very nice and flat, I discovered about a bow, about 1 or 2 millimeters bow. So I decided to try first time with a sled. I had already this bit, which is a 1.5 inch diameter bit. So after making sure that those parallel guides are really a true plane, I passed the sled. And this was the first time I'm doing this, and I'm pretty happy with the result. It was easier and faster than expected, and it created a perfectly smooth and flat surface. But you will see that I did not put stoppers on the borders, and in some, when I got very confident that everything was working fine, it slipped and the router made a hole in the middle of the table, as you can see here if you look carefully. So what to do? After telling myself all the curse words that I knew, I decided to notch out a square and put in some kind of other wood inserts. So I cut it using this corner chisel is fantastic to make corners. And after gluing this in place, I used maple, I used also walnut and purple heart. I passed the sled again, and then it was completely flat. This time paying attention, not letting the sled slip again. Then with a belt sander and the normal sander here, the orbital sander, using a a low grain, about 80 to 60-80. And now I needed to create the sticks to put inside of the vices. Of course, I could have bought any rod in Walmart, in Home Depot or Lowe's, but I wanted to make it by my own. So while that was gluing, I decided to make the holes. 3/4, I used this Freud bit, which did not work so well as I was expecting for a Freud bit, because it was not very clean, the cut that it made, but it was way faster than doing this with a Forstner. And of course, I needed to do this with a bit in order to make sure that this was very vertical. I used that oak block that you've seen with a vertical hole. Again, belt sander here, and now just a 45 degrees bit to make the holes look a little bit nicer. Same thing with the jaws, and same thing with the border. Again, I love this wireless router. It gives so much flexibility and is powerful enough for exactly this type of work. Now here in this case I used a Forstner bit since I didn't want to go through it, to make other holes as well. And here we go. And now here I'm constructing the dead man or the dog hole jack. While that was gluing up, I unclamped those glue ups for the sticks, and I put it in the lathe and started to turn them. Again, this is really not necessarily, I just wanted to do it with some scrap pieces that I had lying around. Now going back to the dead man or the sliding jack that I was creating, I couldn't measure. I wanted it to look a little bit more fancy, so I put in some curves. Cutting into oak is always a challenge, but it was not so difficult as I thought for my small bandsaw. With the oscillating spindle sander, in this case band sander, just making sure the curve looks nice, and now putting in the sliding curve. This curve here is just in order to make sure that it slides, and here just creating the guides. I don't have a router bit that makes it in one pass, so I decided to turn this around. I used the complete piece of wood, and then once it was done, I cut out the slide. Also all in oak. The jack and the sliders were all in oak. And here I put in some notches in order to just drill the holes for the screws to attach it to the workbench. Here just create in order to make sure that the screws are, everything is square, so I put this in place, and now I put in the jack, the holes, also with 45 degrees out a bit. I just created that chamfer, already using my bench, which is great. And here I was installing it, make sure that it slides perfectly free and that it does not protrude. And I was a little bit afraid of this part of the bench, but it ended up being great. Another stick, another glue up. Well, actually here, what I was turning here were the knobs for those sticks. And I decided on the end to try a different kind of knob in one of the ends at least, to make a handle to rotate those sticks and faster. And it turned out a nice feature. So you see that I created those kind of mushrooms, cutting them here. Those end knobs and the handles. Trying to make it in the very center. Making the hole in order to put in the sticks. And those sticks would be screwed on the end. In order to make this removable, I can put it in the vise and remove it whenever I need to. And there we go. Rounding one of the ends, making the hole in order to create that rotating handle or the mushroom. Painted it with polyurethane. The outside, of course. And I created a notch in order to make sure that the screw was hidden. And now I did it. And I put in a stop nut at the end to ensure that it gets not loose. There we go. Cool. Now the last sanding with 220 grit to make it smooth. Actually, it doesn't need to be that smooth. And here testing it, the flatness. The flatness is perfect, just perfect. This on the long dimension and this across. You see no light. It's just perfect. And I use boiled linseed oil. I read it some of the books. And there we are. So, thanks for watching.